Well, it's that time of year again. It seems like our country is always at a time where we are fussing with one another about this or that. And there are different holidays and seasons that happen throughout the year where instead of us thinking of ways we can come together, we argue about how we're on separate sides. And Juneteenth is coming up this Friday, and for some reason, the even the mentioning of Juneteenth, the celebration of Juneteenth, the fact that it's a holiday, rubs people the wrong way. And I'm hoping this video gives people another perspective, without ignoring our story, without ignoring all of the things I've gone through with racism and such. Um, at the root of it all, because this is what God commands me to do, I try to find ways that we can come together. The Word of God says, I think it's in Psalms, basically how sweet it is for us to dwell together in unity. Now, a lot of times people take that to connect to the church, but because it's in Psalm, that's before the church, I just think the Lord, as much as we can, to try to seek to live at peace with one another, to find that common ground, that common humanity. And I want to share with you how I view Juneteenth and July 4th. And I connect it to Christmas time. And I got this idea from a painting. There's a painting, I don't know who the artist is, but there's a painting of Abraham Lincoln, I think, walking through Richmond at the end of the Civil War, and slavery is ending. And as he's walking through Richmond, I believe, the picture shows Black people thanking him. A lot of people don't like the picture because it shows Black people kneeling at him and he's kind of hitting their head. And you can look at it both ways. There's a part of me that doesn't like it either, because I do struggle with any images of white supremacy. But I did some research on the painting and what was happening there. And evidently, Abraham Lincoln was in Richmond to do something, and it was soon after the enslaved people found out they were free. And when they saw him, they were so grateful. They came to him to thank him. And Abraham Lincoln's bodyguards or people or whatever was trying to keep the people away and wanted him to not touch the people or the people to touch him. And because, as you know, even though slavery ended under Abraham Lincoln, he wrestled with white supremacy and most of the people around him. It was not America, even though slavery ended with the end of the Civil War. The Civil War was not really fought because America loved Black people. So that's a whole nother video for another day. But even still, slavery ended with the end of the Civil War. And the Black people were so thankful that when they saw Abraham Lincoln, they thanked him. They wanted to touch him. They wanted to just kind of kneel down in gratitude. And what Abraham Lincoln did was he told his people, no, let me spend time with them. And he sat there and allowed people to touch him, to hug him, to kneel down before him, to touch his hands. And he touched them. And he allowed himself to be embraced by the Black community in that moment. Once I read that history, the painting sort of took on new meaning for me, even as my triggers were dinging. Testimony from this. So this is not just a white person's version. And one of the enslaved people said, and when I read this, this is when I began to change how I viewed Juneteenth and July 4th. One of the Black people said it felt like Christmas. And it should. Freedom was a gift. After hundreds of years of captivity, my ancestors were finally free. Even though it was messy, even though it was hard, even though soon after that freedom, white supremacists began to, brutally attack Black people, and Abraham Lincoln had to send in soldiers to protect us as we tried to navigate a life as free people. They were free. And I've heard many stories. If you read the book Never Caught, which tells the story of the enslaved woman who got away from George Washington. It's called Never Caught. It's the story of Ona Judd. She was she was a slave who ran away from George Washington, and she died in poverty. She was very poor did not have a good life. But George, and so George Washington was confused as to why would you leave? I have a house for you, because the story goes that George Washington treated his slaves or enslaved people very nicely. He made sure they were clothed, fed, they lived in nice houses. He only whipped them sometimes when they just got out of line, but he was generally a really nice slave owner. Lots of sarcasm there if you didn't notice. And he didn't understand why she ran away. He did not understand. And so he is just wondering why. And Ona Judd's like, I don't care if I'm living on the dirt. I'm free. That's how valuable freedom was to people. Somehow, the white supremacists think, even with nice slave owners, that as long as they're taking care of us, we should just be grateful. All the while, we are not free to come and go as we please, to do what we want, to marry who we want, to just live in total freedom. Freedom is a gift, rich or poor. Freedom is a gift. And so, this going back to the story of how Black people felt with the end of the Civil War and slavery ending, an enslaved person talks about how it felt like Christmas. So when I think about the Christmas season, it goes from usually Thanksgiving until New Year's. We consider that the Christmas season, right? Most of us put up our Christmas decorations the day after Thanksgiving. That's the tradition. The Thanksgiving day is like kind of the beginning of it all. And then, because I've been at Thanksgiving dinners where we're putting up the tree after Thanksgiving dinner, right? And we're celebrating all the way through Christmas. We keep those decorations up. Some of us go right into Epiphany to January 6th. That's what I do. And that is our season. That month and a half is our season. Or I think it's a month and a week. And so this is how I celebrate Juneteenth and July 4th. I consider June 19th the beginning of liberation season. Let's go with me here. Listen to me here. Liberation season, just like we have Christmas season, right? I call June 19th, Juneteenth, is the beginning of liberation season. And before our emancipation, there's a woman named Phyllis Wheatley. She was well before our emancipation. She was in the early days of America, in fact. Phyllis Wheatley wrote poetry. She's the first Black woman published in America. Died in poverty as well, but we all love her poetry now. And one of the things she did through her poetry, she eventually became a free woman. Her master set her free. And she writes letters to George Washington, to soldiers, to anyone who would listen. And this is during the time period of the Revolutionary War. As you fight for your freedom, remember my people too. And it would be many, many years before that dream was realized, and she was long gone. She died young. But there was a dream, and her letters, she wrote letters to George Washington. There's a correspondence between Phyllis Wheatley and George Washington, encouraging him as he fights for the freedom of America. I have ancestors who were free Blacks, who were never enslaved. The Artist family, who actually fought in the Revolutionary War, even came as pilgrims to America. We have the story of Crispus Attucks, who was the first casualty of the Revolutionary War. And there are stories that say he was the first one whose life was taken because he had invited other settlers to stand against the redcoats to fight for freedom, even though he himself was a fugitive slave. So there are so many stories of the role Black people have played in the liberation of America. And so Juneteenth and July 4th are very much connected. They're very much related. And for us to think of them as separate means we're still stuck in Jim Crow. We're still stuck before the emancipation, right? We're still stuck at the breakdown of Reconstruction. For you to see July 4th and Juneteenth as against each other means you don't read much and you don't know America's history. And so July 4th, we all were involved in that, right? There are so many stories of things we did to fight in the Revolutionary War, to fight for America's freedom.